everybody, my name is Haley. I'm here from ProWritingAid, and thank you guys so much for joining us in another session in the ProWritingAid series for writers. Today's session is led by Professor AJ Ogilvie, who is our in-house writing expert here at ProWritingAid. AJ spent 10 years designing and teaching undergraduate and MBA level writing and communication courses. His primary research interests are writing development, knowledge transfer, and communication curriculum in higher education. So welcome, AJ. So thrilled to have you here.
Thanks so much, Haley. I'm really excited to be here, everyone. Let's jump right in. What I'm going to talk about today is something that I think applies to everyone and might apply to us at various or multiple moments in our lives, in our career. So I think a lot of us are just wondering, how do we boost our career? How do we jumpstart it? How do we add something new to what we're doing to change things, to improve them? And so what I'm going to talk about today is how to do that with a white paper. There are three goals for today's webinar. The first is I want to provide you with one really specific strategy for boosting your career. The second is I want to demystify the white paper. I think that, and I'm going to ask everybody in a second to jump in, I think that a lot of us have ideas about what a white paper is, or we hear about it. Maybe some of us have written them, but I think in general, the white paper is not really well understood. So I want to demystify the white paper for everyone today. And then I want to actually give you actionable steps to write and market a white paper. So a little bit of background on careers. And I think that most of us have a general sense of what our careers might look like. But when we look at some aggregate data, it's really interesting that most of us will have about an average, and this is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, so this is the United States, we'll have an average of 12 jobs over our career, which I don't think we realize. I think that's a lot. I think that's more than we think. And then the average tenure of a job for men is 4.3 years. And for women is 4 years. And so what this suggests really is that we're really kind of moving a lot more than we might think, and that there's a lot of diversity, there's a lot of flux, there's a lot of dynamism. And unfortunately, I think a lot of these things happen, a lot of that flux and dynamism can happen out of our control. So some of us might have been affected by it, might have been, and are currently and will be affected by COVID in terms of our careers. I personally was laid off during the 2008-2009 recession, which definitely had a significant impact on how I thought about my career, how I thought I could be prepared for my career. So I think in all of this, if we think that we're going to have 12 jobs and we're going to be changing our jobs every 4 years, what we want to think about is how can we optimize all of that flux. That is, like, how can we optimize how we approach handling all this dynamism and all of this change? And I think one really great way to think about that is to write a white paper. And we often hear about career advice is, oh, we should network more, we should start a blog, we should upskill, take some new courses, go do a master's or an MBA. And I think these are all completely valid. And I think one of the advantages of a white paper, I believe, is that it's something that you can sort of start without significant resources, that you can start to just do this on your own and start to think about it. So let's jump in. Why write a white paper for your career? Well, the truth is that a white paper helps you build credibility and authority among key stakeholders like clients or industry. And you build that credibility and authority because you offer them valuable knowledge and insight. Right? And what I mean by that is you're not just speaking or you're not just writing a white paper about some sort of random knowledge, but it's a knowledge that these stakeholders find valuable and you become seen as an expert. And the second part is that a white paper gives you original, unique knowledge that you can leverage with these stakeholders to produce new opportunities. So that as a result of doing the white paper, you become seen as a problem solver or someone who is seeing what's not there or seeing trends, seeing future things that might happen. And I think we'd all agree that this is the kind of person, the kind of thinker that we want on our team. So what is a white paper? And what I want to do real quickly is just do an informal poll on the chat. And I just want you to write, you can write it to me privately on a scale of 1 to 5. 5 being I'm very knowledgeable about white papers, and 1, I don't know anything about white papers. Would everyone mind putting in the chat? Again, you can, if you want to put it privately to me, that's fine. Where are you on white papers? Are you 5, a very knowledgeable, or 1, not very knowledgeable? Okay, great. Seeing some. Oh, okay. If you don't know what a white paper is, yeah, you can just say 1. Great. And so my goal today is for those of you who are a 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 even, that I bump that up, that by the end of today, you go up to a 3 or 4 or 5. And for those of you who are at 4 or close to 5, hopefully I can add something to your existing toolbox that you use for thinking about and producing white papers. But also in the Q&A, I'd love to hear from those of you who have written them or are comfortable with them or read them a lot. And I'd love for you to share your knowledge of the white paper. So let's jump in. What is a white paper? So I first want to start with this idea that companies do a lot of things, right? And one of the things that companies do is they sell things. And companies sell things that they make. But also what a lot of companies do in between this selling and making, and as part of the effectiveness of selling and making things, is they educate, they teach, they explain, they provide clients and stakeholders with important information. And I don't think we often think about that. And so my view for any of you who are new to white papers is that when you've always heard the term or you've never heard the term and you kind of think, what is a white paper? I just want you to think about this idea of, it's organizations, nonprofits, or even government agencies, it's an opportunity to educate. And there's different ways that the different forms that this education takes. And we'll get into some of the details of that. But it's not a sales pitch, right? A white paper is not a sales pitch. It is an explainer, is it an educator, and in some sense it's a persuader in terms of thinking about a particular solution or problem or perspective. So white papers do vary, and I'm going to show you that in a little bit. White papers do vary across organizations and industries. But my own take is that if we're trying to broadly identify a couple key features of white papers across all industries, because I'm sure all of you are coming from different industries, I've identified 3 features. And there's likely more, but I just wanted to try to get the 3 core ones. And it's this. The first one is that a white paper focuses on one specific problem, issue, or perspective. And the key quality of this first one is that it's one. And that a white paper has a very clear scope and focus, and that it's not all over the place, and that it's not broad, but that it's distinctly focused on a problem, an issue, or a perspective. This is a white paper done by Apple, and it's their approach to automated driving safety. And the singular focus of this is that they wanted to provide a very clear articulation of their perspective on automated driving safety. So there's been, the general public is the audience for this, right? The general public is in the United States at least, there's some concern over automated driving. And what Apple felt was we need to educate the public about how we are moving forward and what kinds of ideas and philosophies and beliefs are guiding how we develop autonomous vehicles and automated driving. And so they produced a white paper. Again, it wasn't selling their system and it wasn't selling any Apple products. It was just educating the general public about how they are going about developing autonomous vehicles. Okay. A second thing is a white paper is generally in depth, and it's deeper and longer than a memo, and it's roughly 3,000 to 5,000 words. I took a snapshot of this white paper that Microsoft did around digital technology opportunities. And as you can see on the left-hand side, these are the last 3 pages, but it's the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th page. So as you can see, a white paper is something that someone will sit down with and spend some time with and try to understand and read like a document. And as we'll see though, is just, yes, it is in depth, and yes, it is 3,000 to 5,000 words, but that doesn't mean that it's simply all text. And there's lots of variation in terms of how people present text and how people use images. So, and lastly, a white paper is grounded in research, data, and evidence. So a white paper is not merely one opinion or a sort of half belief of something, but that it's a perspective, a solution, a view that's grounded in research, data, and evidence. So this example, this is a snapshot of an Accenture white paper that they did on trends in technology. And all I wanted to show you was just an example of what kinds of data are used in white papers. And so we have this statistic: 84% of executives agree that through technology, companies are weaving themselves seamlessly into the fabric of how people live today. So I would argue a white paper is not a white paper unless it has some kind of data, evidence, or research in it. Okay, I'm going to get to the question at the end. So how do I write a white paper? Let's get into the specifics of it. So the first thing that you must do, and especially if you're thinking about your career, is you have to figure out your audience. Who do you want to have an impact on? But perhaps more importantly, if you did have an impact on someone, who might that audience or person be that would have the most impact on your career? And so the thing that you want to think about maybe is, who do you want to work with? Who are the kinds of people that you want to engage with? And then another way to think about it is, who do you know well, right? And who is someone that you already know enough about that you think you can figure out some key questions about them, like what kinds of problems or issues they're having, which we'll talk about in the next slide. But so I work in higher ed, for example, and if I wanted to write a white paper as a professor of business communication, I could potentially write a white paper, and my audience could be the administration of colleges and universities in the United States. And I could identify some kind of problem that I think they might have. And it might be around something around my expertise, maybe communications courses. And I could write a white paper talking about the future of communication courses in higher ed. And my audience would be administrators, who are the kinds of people who make decisions about what courses are taught, what courses are needed. So this could be, and if I perhaps wanted to get a job in administration in higher ed, if I wanted to be a dean or even a president someday, this is the kind of thing that would be really helpful for my career. This would be evidence of my ability to be a dean because I'm thinking in this area. So this is hard. This is very hard. But the key thing to think about is, who are the people that you most significantly want to impact and work with and engage? The next thing you must do is, for this group, you have to figure out what kinds of problems they have. What are their concerns? What are their worries? And focusing on their problems and their concerns and their worries is a way of making sure that your white paper is going to get read, right? That this is an actual pressing need that they have, or it's a need that they have that they didn't know they have. And you have to kind of persuade them that, hey, this is something that you should keep an eye out for. Another way of thinking about it is, what is something that this audience needs to know more about? What is a technology? What is a perspective that they don't know about that they would benefit from if they did, right? And so the challenge of this is that you must write about something that this audience will be interested in and care about and want to know, but you yourself must be interested in it as well, right? And so striking this sweet spot between something that works for them and something that works for you is not always easy, right? So if there's a key takeaway for steps 1 and 2, is that you must write a white paper for an audience who has a real pressing need and wants to read that white paper. And they should feel that your white paper fills a key knowledge gap in their organization. An ideal scenario would be that someone at this organization or in this industry reads your white paper and says, and says to other people in that industry, you need to read this. This is really helpful. This is really important. So step 3 is, once you've identified your audience and their problem, you'll have to research the problem. And research can feel completely overwhelming, for sure, right? And so there's 2 ways to think about research. There's primary research and there's secondary research. And I'm going to start with primary research, which I think is generally the more difficult one. And so primary research would be you collecting data, you doing interviews or focus groups or sending out surveys or running models on something, however you define what research or data is in your field. But this would be your own. And while this kind of research would be, would kind of have a higher value because you yourself have created it, admittedly, it is hard to do this kind of research. So Qualtrics is a survey company that has a really great survey design. If you wanted to create a survey and you have the people, if you have a group of survey respondents that would answer, this is a great idea. SurveyMonkey is a relatively expensive research tool where you could create a survey of 10 questions and send it out to, let's say if I were doing my higher ed example of my white paper, and I wanted to talk about the future of communication courses in higher ed, I could send out a survey to every communications professor in the United States and try to ask them, hey, where do you think things are going? What are the trends, right? This is one way I could collect primary research for my white paper. But you do not have to have primary research in your white paper. And what you can use is secondary research. And secondary research is when you just do research on your own. And in terms of this, secondary research is you do a Google search, and the best thing to do would be see if any white papers have been written already about the topic that you're interested in. And maybe they've been written about a similar area, but you really want to know what is the existing knowledge out there. And so depending on your topic, you want to look at every journal, magazine, newspaper. What have people said about this topic? What kinds of solutions have people proposed for this problem? You want to look at academic research, and you can collect all of that and formulate an argument using just secondary research. And this is one reason why I really like the white paper as a career booster, is that you could build an excellent white paper using just secondary research. And people will find it valuable because you are doing all the curation. You're bringing together all these different data points and formulating it into a narrative. Okay, so I think a white paper can be very overwhelming in many ways. And so there's so many different structures that you can use for your white paper. But one 30,000 foot structure that I think could be really helpful is what I call the problem solution format. And this is an age-old structure that we use for all kinds of things. We use this for memos. We could use this for emails. We could use this interpersonally when you're trying to explain something to someone. You start with, all right, let me first frame up the problem for this person, and then let me frame up the solution. And this is a really logical structure. And so this kind of structure, a simple problem solution structure, not only works for you, the writer, because it liberates you. All right, in the beginning, I'm going to explain the problem, and then I'm going to explain the solution. But that's how your reader naturally thinks about things, right? We, as humans, we naturally think in this sort of problem solution format. So I want to give you an example. This is from a white paper that was done by Union. That's a digital marketing agency. And this is in their opening page. They set up the problem. And what I want to do is just read the first paragraph that illuminates the problem that they're talking about. So here we go. But that doesn't mean retailers haven't suffered devastating blows at the hands of e-commerce, which currently accounts for 13.2% retail sales in the US and is likely to reach a sales amount of $1 trillion by 2025. The ease and convenience of e-commerce changed consumer expectations of the shopping experience, a trend that retailers have struggled adjusting to. And so this white paper was written by Union, a digital marketing agency, and they are solving a problem, which is how can brick and mortar retails become more digitally savvy? How can they stay competitive with competitors that are only digital, that are direct to consumer, that are only online? So this is a real problem for Union's audience of brick and mortar retailers. And so early on, this is how they frame it up. This is how they explain it, that this is the challenge. And obviously what we assume the rest of the white paper does is provide a solution, which we'll see in the next in this next slide. So this is a screenshot of one of their solutions for the problem of how brick and mortar retailers can become more digitally savvy. And what they do, and I'll read this bottom paragraph, is this is their solution. They say retailers can maximize this advantage of having in-person experiences by infusing the shopping experience with entertainment and technology to create something that can only be found in stores, experiential retail. So I want to make it clear. So this is just an example of one area of the solution for this white paper and one area of the problem. But I wanted to show you really clear examples of problem and solution. Okay, so step 5 is a really key part, which is how are you going to market your white paper? And so what might happen is we produce a white paper, and all that hard work and all that effort in some ways can be lost if we don't figure out how to optimize how we market it and how we distribute it. And this is particularly important for the career part. And so the first way to think about it is via email. And here's what I suggest. I think that you've identified your clear audience, so you know who you want this to send to. So let's say, again, I'm sending it to administrators in higher ed. Well, I'm going to collect as many emails as possible, or LinkedIn, connections of this target audience of higher ed administrators. But rather than send a mass email to all of them, let's say it's a list of 200, I am going to identify 10 to 15 who I think are influencers and who are the people who are presenting at conferences, who are the people who everyone else is looking up to. And there's different ways to figure this out, but I want to identify the top 10 to 15 major players. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to craft a personal email to this particular person. And in this email, I'm going to write a short value proposition. And I'm going to say, Dr. Smith, I know that I've read your recent blog post here, or I've read your book, or I'm familiar with the presentation you gave last year, and it's clear that you're concerned about where the future of higher ed curriculum is going. I too am concerned, which is why I've developed a white paper about the future of communication specifically, which I believe to be the bedrock, the foundation of a higher ed degree. And then I provide a link. And so here's why I think you need to do that additional work to tailor specific emails to a select group of 10 to 15 people, is that if you've produced the white paper, you have spent a significant amount of time doing this, right? You have spent a significant amount of time working on this. And what that means is you just need to go the extra mile to maximize that investment that you've put in. And so for the other group, So if let's say it's a list of 200 people that you want to email, for that other group, you can send out a mass email. And I think that's okay because we're going to do a few other things. So in terms of repurposing, I want you to imagine the metaphor that I'd use is on Sunday night, you do meal planning and you make a huge roast chicken. And Sunday night, you eat half of that roast chicken. And Monday, you repurpose the dark meat of the leg and thigh and you make a soup, right? And that's what you do on Monday. And then on Tuesday, you repurpose it and you make a chicken stock, for example. So that metaphor is what we're going to use for your white paper. The only thing is that the beautiful part of the white paper is that it's inexhaustible. That, like your chicken will ultimately, you'll use it all up, but your white paper, you can continue to repurpose it. And what you must figure out is this: who are some writers, some outlets, some bloggers, some blogs where you could be a guest blogger or guest writer, and you want to figure out how one section perhaps or one aspect of your white paper. So you're not going to say, I want you to publish my white paper to this blogger. You're just going to say, I have a blog post that I think would work perfectly for the content and the audience of your blog. And then what you would do is you would ideally, send them a sample. And if they post it, you would then link to the full version of this blog post is found in a white paper here, and you would provide a link to that. And so if you think that your white paper, again, white papers really vary. If you think that your white paper is 10 pages or it has 3 or 4 sections, you might be able to take those 3 or 4 sections and turn that into 6 or 8 different blog posts. And now you're getting your ideas, your authority, your knowledge, you're getting it across all these different forms, right? So the last thing you must do is look for speaking opportunities. And I think, during COVID, we've definitely had a slowdown in terms of events and conferences, but I think we've seen people say, well, we're going to do it virtually, or, we're going to plan for 2021 or 2022. So, but what you want to do is that people are always looking for great speakers who have unique knowledge and insight. And so you want to pitch your white paper and the key value it provides to these different conferences and say, I know that you have a conference coming up about higher ed curriculum. I've recently produced a white paper about that, and I'm happy to provide you with a 1-page overview of it and show you the kinds of things that I would speak about if I were speaking at your conference. Okay, so what I want to do now is I have 3 examples of white papers, and I want to walk you through and just highlight a couple differences. And here's why I'm doing this. If you are going to write a white paper, the best thing you can do is gather as many examples you can as possible. And ideally, those examples are industry specific. And so the best thing you can do is figure out, in my industry or in my field, what are some examples of white papers? And then you're going to borrow ideas from those industries or fields, or those example white papers. So I know we've got a bunch of questions. I'm going to get to those. I just want to go through these examples, and then we're going to go through all of your questions. So I'm going to now pull up. Okay, so this is the union. This is the union, the digital marketing company. This is their white paper. And for any of you who might know a little bit about white papers, what I'm always struck by is this does not look like a white paper to me, because I often think of a white paper as dry and kind of boring. And I think this shows you that in this industry, in the marketing industry, graphics and visual stimulation, visual design is really important. That when Union and the writer Evan Alexander, when he produced this white paper, he couldn't just copy and paste them, but it couldn't look like a Word document. It needed to look like something you wanted to read. It needed to be visually compelling. And I think that's a value in the marketing industry. So this is an industry specific look and feel, but I just want to walk you through it. And you'll see that it's readable, right? It's meant to be read, but it almost feels like a magazine. And there's lots of white space, as you notice. And it's also, I'd argue, really well organized. And that it moves us through these different sections. It has great graphics. It has little inset kind of descriptors, that kind of explain the graphics. And so I'm just gonna quickly move you through these. I also really love these big statistics that pop and emphasize a particular point on that page. It creates contrast. It just creates a much more interesting read. The other thing I think that's really key about this too, that I think is effective, is that it's written in a really engaging and accessible way, right? That none of this, I don't think that the readability scale, if we use ProWritingAid, we'd find it to be at a very high level, which is what we want, right? We want as many people as possible to read this. But I really like the moments where they kind of distill the big idea of a page into, one really pithy short sentence. So again, this is Union's white paper, visually compelling. I'm going to pull up another one. So really different industry to a certain degree. This is Accenture, the large global consulting firm. And this is a white paper they did that looks at future trends in technology. And clearly, you could argue that Accenture is selling itself, but it's selling itself in a really indirect way, because it's selling itself by getting you, the audience, to think, wow, Accenture is very dynamic, they're very forward thinking, and they're very sharp. So I also think what I find interesting too is that despite the fact that it's Accenture, one of the classic consulting firms, that this is still very visually compelling, and that it makes you want to read. And all of the the contrast, the colors are bright and engaging. To me, this does not feel like an old school white paper. This one is significantly longer than the Union one, as you can see. And this is another example of the variety of white papers, is that this one is 72 pages and the Union one was 15. And it doesn't mean either one is better or correct or but it's just different purposes, different audiences with different needs. So, and I also just want to, again, emphasize the fact that white papers, at least the ones that I'm showing you, are also written in a really engaging, conversational way, interactive way, with the first person. How do you improve the way people work and live? Okay, and then I'm just going to move to one last one. And this is, I think, a really fascinating white paper. And we can kind of interpret what produced this white paper, what need or problem or question that some stakeholder had. And so Swiss Re is a massive multinational insurance company. And here is an automated driving technology company. And they paired up on this white paper to answer this question: what will car insurance look like if all of us are using automated vehicles? Because this is a question a lot of people are asking, but no one has ever, well, apparently, at least from the reason that this exists, is that no one's really answered that in any substantive way. And I think what Swiss Re and here are showing you is that they're going to get ahead of everybody and answer this question, even though it's probably very difficult to answer, but they know that they'll establish themselves as authority and as credible and as knowledgeable and as experts in this new domain that's emerging because they produced a white paper. And again, I just want to emphasize that, the insurance industry and autonomous vehicles, not necessarily, old school traditional kinds of companies, but sort of, and you'll still see that this is written in what I believe to be a pretty engaging and simple and clear way, with lots of great graphics, lots of charts. I'm not in this industry, but to be fair, I think I could probably read this and still understand it. And again, despite the fact that I'm not in this industry, it changes my perception of here, the two companies here and Swiss Re, because they've written this. And again, this is another difference. This is 23 pages, And so these are 3 examples of white papers that I think illustrate the 3 features that we talked about, right? That a white paper must focus on a particular problem or issue or perspective. A white paper should be in-depth and substantive. So these are all lengthy. They're beyond 1 pages or 2 pages. And lastly, that white papers are evidence and data driven. So I want to stop there. I know we have some great questions, and I'm also really want to emphasize that a lot of you have likely written white papers, and I'd love to hear from your experiences. So you don't even have to have a question if you want to jump in. It could be a comment. I'd encourage those. So let's jump in.
Okay, we've got a bunch of great questions. So the first one from Sandy says, do you have to cite research at the end? I didn't see any citations inside your examples.
You do. And I think citation, that's a great question, Cindy. Citation is everything, especially if it's not your research. And I think the thing too here is, in higher ed and in high school, we always talk about you have to cite so you show that it's not your own research. And I think that's true. But the other thing is that you really cite because if people want to know more about that particular kind of data point, then you're telling them, hey, here's the source if you want to go learn more about it. So you do need to cite, and that's totally critical. But what I think you probably observe too is that when you cite, it doesn't have to be in that clunky APA or MLA way. It just has to be in a way that makes sure that you've visibly and clearly shown where the reader can find the source of that particular data point.
Awesome.
Great question.
Okay, someone asked, how is a white paper different than a journal article?
This is a great question. And a white paper is significantly different. Whoever asked that, I think I'm assuming you're thinking of a journal article in terms of higher ed, like a professor in an academic journal. And so one massive difference is that a white paper is self-produced. So Accenture, for example, they just made that white paper. They didn't submit it to a journal. And so it's self-sponsored, whereas a journal has a group of editors, it has blind reviewers, and a journal is something that a professor would submit to because they're trying to generate new knowledge in their field, but it has to be peer reviewed and it has to go through this serious editing process. So interestingly, a white paper is generated by the organization or the individual themselves, and then they distribute it. So there's no external group vetting it, which admittedly can lead to white papers. Someone could say, well, white papers are at risk of maybe not having accurate information. And that's true, but that's just up to the reader to figure that out. In terms of length and what it looks and feels like, the white paper has a significant more amount of diversity in terms of what it looks like. A journal article, again, I'm generalizing, but generally journal articles across all academic disciplines, which again, I'm generalizing, is going to have a little bit more of a rigid format and a more dictated format. Whereas the white paper, as you can see from the example of Union, there's a lot of flexibility and a lot of openness to do something creative and cool. So great question.
Awesome. Okay, so someone says a white paper is not selling a product or service, but selling a viewpoint that would eventually lead to the sales of a product or service. Would you agree with that?
100%. And the Swiss real estate here.com, the here.com white paper about the future of auto insurance in an age of autonomous driving is such a good example of that. So let's say, as autonomous vehicle technology improves, as companies and people start to look for insurance on it, they're going to look at people who are already established in this field and already speaking and knowledgeable about it. And so you're absolutely right. And the sort of Trojan horse quality of a white paper is just as you say, is that you're able to sell people on a potential product or service, but they come to that white paper not more open because they know they're not being sold something, right? That they go, oh, I'm just being educated, which is refreshing as opposed to someone trying to pitch me on something. So great question. Yep.
Okay, so Jim asks, is there also a place for experiential explanation of your own gathered industry professional experience on a particular topic?
Okay, so Jim, I want to reframe this to make sure that I get it right, because I think I know what you're talking about. Experiential explanation of own gathered on a particular subject. I think what you're saying is there a place for me to write or speak just from like a narrative perspective, not necessarily producing a white paper about my knowledge, but just sharing my knowledge. And my own view is that, yes, a blog is a really great place for that. And they're linked is a blog and a Twitter feed, or a social media presence on Facebook is so you would have a blog and you would say, you would write a blog post, and then on Twitter, you would go promote that to the audience that you're interested in talking to.
Awesome. Okay, so Linda asks, if an organization or company publishes a white paper, does it have to name a person as an author?
My assumption, what I've observed about this is that is really up to the company. And so for the Union one, for example, it had one author on it. Although it's funny because I'm assuming he likely got help on that. But there's no requirement to name a person, but usually there are a group of people, 2 to 3 people who were involved in the production of it. And the reason why you'd want to associate the white paper with a person is that often people want to follow up. And if there's a name on it and contact information, people will read the white paper and say, oh, I want to know more. And if you are, as we've discussed, if a white paper is an indirect and subtle way of selling something, you want potential clients to be able to find you, easily, rather than just kind of have a generic website address or a generic company email. So yes, I think you'll generally see people's names on it, but it's up to the company. This is the neat thing about a white paper, is that the company gets to decide what it looks like.
Awesome. Okay, so a couple requests for resources. So someone asks, where can I find a white paper template, and do you have any recommendations for some?
I do. Well, so I think there are so many out there. Here's my advice, is to do a classic Google search for white papers and figure out what you're comfortable with. There are people who you can pay who will help you write your white paper. They will pay, you can pay them to get advice on it. I think personally, the best thing to do, so we have a blog post that we're going to, that sort of distills a lot of the ideas today that we'll post on the ProWritingAid blog. But there are lots of great people out there giving great advice about how to write white papers. I can share some links after this, but there's a website called Paperflight, and they're a content company that have lots of amazing examples of white papers. And so my view is the most effective way to write a white paper is to read lots of white papers that are in your industry, that you think are, we would call them target texts. This is the kind of text that I want to produce, and really analyze it for, where did they put the problem? How did they articulate the problem? Where did they put the solution? How did they articulate the solution? My general belief, I've been teaching, writing for a long time, is that we undersell the importance of mimicry and imitation, and I'm not saying copying by any means or plagiarizing, but what I'm saying is you do not reinvent the wheel, that you build on what others have done, because that's what they did as well. So.
Awesome. A similar question, but not necessarily specifically about white papers, but someone asked if you could recommend any rhetoric and composition resources like courses, books, blogs, etc.
What I'm going to suggest you do is this is my field, rhetoric and composition, and I'm going to put my email in the chat for ProWritingAid, and email me with more specific questions about what you're trying to do. And the reason I say that is that rhetoric and composition is such a massive field that to even begin is challenging. And if only, there's a website called the CWPA, which is the Council of Writing Program Administrators. That's a great place to start. So the CWPA, the Council of Writing Program Administrators. And then there's also what's called the 4 Cs, which is the Conference on College Composition Conference on College Composition and Communication. That's another great place to begin. So I just threw a ton of acronyms at you. I'll repeat them. There's the CWPA, the Council of Writing Program Administrators. There's the CCCC, which is the Conference on College Composition and Communication. And then there's one more, which is the NCTE, the National Center for the Teaching of English. These 3 websites are great places to begin.
Awesome. Okay, so Pam says, my experience is in a workplace where they gave me a topic and asked me to write a white paper on the topic. What I did lines up with what you have presented. The new part was marketing. I'd never considered that since I had not yet written one for myself. So thanks so much for this class.
Yeah, I'm interested, Pam, too. I think you could ask if you're still at the organization or if it's a previous one, I think you could ask them if you could use that, if you could use that material and maybe scrub it of any, I don't know if there's some sort of proprietary information, but yeah, I mean, anything we produce, we should see as potential career boosters. So that's great to hear that you've already written one.
Awesome. Okay. And then Lynn says, what is a good source of access to research materials? Often the general public only has access to the abstracts rather than the full journal articles.
Lynn, this is a major problem, and that there's a significant number of professors in college and universities who believe that all this information should be free. And you're absolutely right. It's really expensive. I don't know if your organization can't get you access to particular databases and pay for it. You're absolutely right that this can become an expensive thing. One trick is if you find some articles or research papers and you have the names of the people who've written them. Often, if you reach out to those people directly, they will send you a PDF of the article without charging you, because they want more people reading it. So do not hesitate to reach out to the actual authors of these articles if you have to pay $30 or something for it otherwise.
That's a great tip. Mac asks, do you recommend any particular writing styles for white papers?
I do, Mac, and I think writing styles is always a sort of a challenging term, right? Because what is style? It's so difficult to interpret, to define. But for me, I like to think about style in terms of what kinds of relationship are you creating with your reader, with your words. And my own personal view is I would take the approach that the Union white paper took or the Accenture white paper took, which is write as you speak. Write for clarity, write for connection, write for meaning. And so you want someone to want more. And usually we want more of what we've read if we fully understand it, and if we didn't have to work that hard to read it and understand it.
Awesome. All right. And
okay.
Final question from Fyodor says, I never understood why they called it a white paper, as it's full of information.
I think that's it's a great point. And I wonder if maybe at a certain point we'll stop calling them white papers and we'll have a better word for it, because it seems like an antiquated idea or an antiquated term. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think those are all the questions that we had. I'm going to drop in the chat one more time all of our sign-up links and then AJ's email as well, so that you guys can send him any messages or questions that you had. I know some people were asking him about resources. So yeah, thank you guys so much for attending. AJ, any final words?
No, thanks. I really love doing these, and I appreciate everybody here, and you always have great questions and insights, and I'm happy to talk offline with people about some specifics. So
awesome. All right, thanks guys. We will catch you again soon. Bye.
Bye.